Hello everyone, this is part 4 of What If Naruto Was Born in the Dark, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. A chill wind howled as two young figures faced each other. Naruto standing lazily just feet away from the fuming Hikaru. After a minute of silence, Hikaru ground out, "So you're going to K me just like you K all these people. You're just a monster. These people, they had dreams, they had lives, family, they had futures. You took it all away from them and you don't even feel remorse for what you did." Hikaru was left huffing after his outburst, leaving an amused Naruto before him. Naruto sighed and walked over to one of the many lifeless bees on the ground. Naruto then said, "You sound like a broken record, my friend. They had dreams, how poetic of you. But unfortunately, in order to get ahead in this life, you must step on people along the way." He emphasized this by nonchalantly placing his foot on the corpse before him while simultaneously laughing at his cruel joke. As expected, Hikaru, clouded by anger, attacked head-on. He rushed Naruto without a thought. Just a second before Hikaru's fist collided, Naruto sent a huge shockwave of chakra out and blasted Hikaru several feet away. As Hikaru shook his head, he returned to sit down. He was surprised to hear Naruto's voice behind him. "I see you haven't improved much since our last meeting. But things have changed since then, haven't they? I am no longer crippled, but you weren't much companion even when I was crippled. Once a weakling, always a weakling, I suppose." Naruto's drawling voice taunted. Hikaru didn't blindly attack as expected, but merely hung his head and said, "I'm not weak." Naruto raised an elegant eyebrow and scoffed, "If you're trying to joke, I must admit I do find it funny. If not, that's even better." Naruto walked up to the shaking Naruto, his face mere inches away from Hikaru's. "But you and I both know that you don't believe a word of what you just said. We both know this." Hikaru looked up into Naruto's smirking crimson eyes and snarled as he attacked with all he had. Surprised as he was by Hikaru's ferocious attack, Naruto was immediately put on the defensive. After a few blows, Naruto regained his footing and sent Hikaru flying with a brutal kick to the head. Naruto smirked at Hikaru as he struggled back to his feet and said, "I suppose I'll have to teach you where you stand in this world." Hikaru brought himself upright and yelled back, "What is it that I have done to you? Exclamation mark. Why do you hate me? Answer me." Naruto's features finally dropped their mocking appeal. He took on a look of deepest loathing. His voice sounded as if all he wished was to take the life before him. "You ask why I hate you? It is simple enough. I hate you for whom you have become. You are the light that replaces the dark in his world. Tell me why I have lived in darkness and you light." Hikaru's face betrayed nothing. He was confused by what Naruto had said, but still he attempted to fight on. He summoned many shadow clones, surprising Naruto, and had them surround Naruto from all sides. After a moment with no counter from Naruto, Hikaru had the clones attack from all at once. Naruto glanced toward the real Hikaru as he flew through the air towards him and said loudly, "You have lived all your life in the light. But now it's my time to shine." A quick hand seal and a huge burst of lightning destroyed all the clones, and the real landed on meters away and still lay there limply. Naruto walked toward the limp body. He stood studying the body before him when suddenly it puffed into smoke. With a roll of his eyes, Naruto began to look with exaggerated turns around for the real Hikaru. Without warning, Hikaru jumped from a hole in the ground he had created with his chakra. With all his strength, Hikaru swung his fist upward, fully intending on messing up Naruto's pretty new face. At the last second, Naruto pulled his head back out of range. Hikaru went flying up above Naruto's head. Naruto was lazily going through hand seals as Hikaru created a shadow clone in midair and used it as a slingshot to send him flying at the unprepared Naruto. In the instant before they collided, Hikaru developed a Rasengan. Seeing this and not having the time for anything else, Naruto created a low-power Chidori to compensate. The two massive forces of chakra collided and a small explosion was sent back at the weaker Chidori. A small typhoon of chakra enveloped Naruto's arm. He was writhing in agony. After the winds had ceased, Naruto stood clutching his burnt arm. Hikaru stood feet away looking triumphant. Naruto then looked up at Hikaru and laughed, Pretty good, Hikaru, you have improved. It seems I won't be joking around with you anymore. But I would wipe that smirk off your mouth. For you see. Naruto raised his injured up to see. It began to heal before the very eyes. I have ascended from what I once was. Naruto lowered his completely healed and began to build up a fully charged Chidori. Hikaru prepared his own Rasengan. They looked at each other and both swung forward. The two great forces collided once more, but this time they struggled against one another. This time, however, the Chidori L through the Rasengan and was driven directly through Hikaru's C. A huge blast of chakra blasted out from the other end of Hikaru's C, colliding into the mountainside. Water rushed out from the hole created coming from an undiscovered river running through the mountain. Hikaru's body floated on top of a small pool created from the rushing water. Naruto watched Hikaru as he breathed heavily. Naruto walked over Hikaru's body and drew his sword. Naruto spoke to the unconscious body. It seems that you're in pain, my young friend. TSK TSK TSK, I suppose it falls onto me to put you out of your misery. I will miss your witty banter, all 3 sentences worth. Naruto brought the blade high over his head and without any remorse brought the blade down to end the foolish battle. As the blade flashed, a thud was heard all around them. Naruto looked up at the figure standing before him blocking his blade. Hello, Honorable Third Hokage. I must admit I'm surprised to see you here. May I ask if you've come to save the trash below you? The third Hokage flourished his legendary staff and sent Naruto flying back. The Hokage was fully dressed in battle attire. Him standing there holding his legendary weapon, one could see him as he truly is a Hokage of the Leaf Village. But age has taken its toll all the same. Sarutobi ignored Naruto and leaned down to examine him. Naruto allowed him to examine the withering child. The Hokage took 3 small pills from his pouch and forced them into Hikaru's mouth. He did a few hand seals and the wound began to heal roughly underneath his palms. The Hokage huffed and said, I'm not as proficient as Tsunade, but it will do. He drew B across his thumb and summoned a small monkey. Take the boy back to the village and give them this message. He handed a small scroll to the monkey. Be careful with him, he will need to go to medical unit. He watched the pair go until Naruto grew restless. I do hope you haven't forgotten me, Lord Hokage. You haven't even commented on the new and improved me. I'm beginning to think you don't care. Although Naruto's words and voice were mocking, but his eyes were as cold as ice. I suppose you are the same as your father after all. The Hokage said with a somber voice. Naruto's every feature twisted into that of rage. How dare you say that I'm the same as that bastard? I am his polar opposite. I detest him in all his forms. He destroyed me and cast me into the dark. Naruto was left breathless, his every feature defined rage. The third continued to look at him with sorrowful eyes. He said, I am sorry I could not have stopped him before he hurt you. But as I look at you now holding his old blade, all I can see is him. You have become the same monster he was. But you can change, he did. Before he s his own life to save the village by resurrecting the fourth in our time of need. He is a hero and villain. The Hokage looked hopefully at Naruto. But was taken back when Naruto began to laugh uncontrollably. For nearly a minute Naruto continued laughing crazily. He nearly collapsed from his fits. He looked up at the third and smirked at him. You think the Snake Master was my father? Why, I do suppose he can be considered more my father than any other. The third looked completely shocked. But who? Naruto continued, who am I? Can't you think of it? Have I been gone for so long that you can't remember me? I suppose I do look different from what I used to. But I had wished that you would remember me. The Hokage looked on with searching eyes that were studying his face carefully. The smirk on Naruto's face, his stance, the shape of his eyes. Slowly the Hokage eyes grew wide with the truth. Naruto. The Hokage said almost hopefully, his eyes brimming with tears. Naruto smiled in earnest. See, you do remember me. The third Hokage and the young villain stand across each other. Flooding waters are rushing against their feet. One stood gaping in disbelief and the other in cruel mirth. Naruto. The Hokage said almost hopefully, his eyes brimming with tears. Naruto smiled in earnest. See, you do remember me. The third's face was contorted in grief. Naruto looked as if he had just won the lottery. Tears dripped down the third's face. Naruto, is that really? You. Naruto looked into the desperate face of the third. His face suddenly lost its grin. Angry waves of chakra poured out of Naruto. If by Naruto you mean the same Naruto that you threw into the darkness and pain after you were done using him, then yes, it's me. The third Hokage couldn't have looked more miserable. But the council threw you into the void. I couldn't stop them. Naruto now looked truly outraged, tried to stop them. You could have, you were Hokage, you could have, but no matter, don't trouble yourself with my misfortune. For as you see him complete. The Hokage walked forward and pulled Naruto in a hug and said, Naruto, I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I did all that was in my power to stop the council. But they were convinced that you were the fox reincarnated. They didn't know who you were or where you came from. Naruto stood stoically in the old man's arms until now. He placed one hand on the man's sea and gently pushed him away. With hand still on the third sea, Naruto said, where I came from. You mean who I came from? Yes, I know him, the fourth's true son. Although I'm sure he would disagree now considering how easy it was to replace me. The third tried to speak, Naruto. The passive look in Naruto's eyes passed and suddenly they were filled with the purest loathing and he said softly, don't you ever call me that again. My name is Naruto. The hand on the third sea started to glow with ominous black chakra and before he could react it passed through his sea and he was paralyzed. The third gasped in pain, what in the world? Naruto smirked at him. You think you can say sorry and it will all be okay. How naive. I suggest you forget who I am and try and think of the best interest of your village. It wasn't so hard when I was an infant. So I am sure you can do it again. But in case your doubts, then allow me to enlighten you about my plans. The Hokage's eyes were locked onto Naruto now. They were brimming with suspicion. I plan to level your precious village. The leaf will fall into shadow and all people will be left to remember is how leaders failed their people. How they failed to save them from oblivion. That will be the legacy of you and your damnable village. Suddenly the third grasped onto Naruto's arms and held them with an iron grip. Naruto gasped out in surprise, how in the world are you able to still move? Almost all of your chakra is gone now. Damn you. Why don't you just s? The third Hokage took another step toward the struggling Naruto. It was obvious that just breathing was straining his energy reserves at this point and yet he still held onto the struggling Naruto. With a deep breath the old man said, I will stop you as you had said, no matter who you are still an enemy of the village and as one who has been entrusted with its protection I will stop you. No matter what you're planning. With his spare hand Naruto made a quick seal and huge amount of the black fired down Naruto's arm and into the old man's body. He screamed and fell unconscious. The place where Naruto's hand had been moments before had turned a dark gray color unbefitting of human skin. Naruto walked over the limp body rubbing his arms to help return the circulation. A pity that one such as you will in such a way. He once again raised his sword over his head and attempted to end the third's life. The staff that had been wielding before suddenly transformed into some sort of giant monkey and into Naruto so hard that he went sailing into the side of the mountain. Not so fast, human. The monkey 10 went down to check on the third and tried to shake him awake. Come on Sarutobi, wake up, don't tell me you just summoned me here to watch us. Naruto's voice suddenly permeated the all around them, so you talk, huh monkey? Don't worry, H is not S, yet. So you should waste your time and get him back to the village before it's too late. The enormous primate growled at the figure as it slowly phased into view right before his eyes. With a reluctant nod the ape picked the third and began walking towards the village, his back turned on Naruto. Naruto's voice followed him, oh and monkey. The ape turned to look at Naruto and grumbled, weren't you the one who said I shouldn't waste my time? So if this is just another one of those useless taunts that you humans enjoy doing, so just stow it. Naruto put up his hands and said, no, nothing as trivial as that. I just wanted to give some advice. Since I'm guessing that you heard our entire conversation, Mr. Monkey, I suggest you not tell them who I really am. If they know, they won't be able to do what's necessary to save themselves. You know how sentimental they can get. The giant simian nodded his head and continued on his way toward the village. Once the pair were out of vision, Naruto chuckled a little and turned around only to meet a pair of fiery crimson eyes. Naruto was aware of the two men in front of him. He was also aware that they both had chakra levels that rivaled the legendary Sannin. He was aware of the fact they could K him with only the most minimal of efforts. But he didn't care. He was too absorbed in those bee pulls the man before him called eyes. The man in front of him pulled of the hat that was shading his face. his red-clouded robe barely rustling as he finished his graceful movements. His face was the most surprising of all. He looked like an older version of Sasuke. And with Sharingans blazing in both eyes, he could only be the infamous Itachi Uchiha. Itachi studied Naruto for a moment and said, "We did not catch all that transpired here. So we do not know the circumstances, but nonetheless it's impressive for anyone to put one such as the third into such a dire state. We would like to know who you are." His eyes flickered onyx for a moment and then were angry crimson once more. Naruto knew he had no choice in the matter. They were asking no questions, they were demanding answers, and with those sharing and upon him they would be able to detect the slightest bit of deceit. So he'll just have to tell half-truths. "I have many names, but you may know me as Naruto." He slowly sheathed his sword to show his understanding of his posture. Itachi raised an eyebrow and said, "Naruto, Well, what then, Naruto? What did you told the monkey not reveal your true identity to the village?" "I'm just asking because you gave us your name rather easily." The other man, who was dressed similar to Itachi but was much taller and had a huge sword wrapped in cloth on his back, walked over and looked Naruto up and down. "The name Kiosk wouldn't happen to be familiar to you, kid?" Naruto blanched and said, "Yes, he was the man who trained me in mist." The larger man laughed. "Yeah, that's his name, Itachi, so calm down. The old man trained me to brat. He mentioned you right before but he said you were a cripple. You may be tiny but you're no cripple." Naruto smirked a little. "So the old man is him, I suppose." "Kisame Hoshigaki." Kisame nodded with a grin and Naruto turned to Itachi for more. Itachi nodded at Kisame and addressed Naruto, "Your skill with seals is impressive. Assuming that you were the 1K all these villages, for what purpose did you need them?" Naruto looked Itachi start in the eyes as he said, "Well, as your friend said before, I was a simple before. But things change. I used these people's life forces in order to be reborn, so to speak. That is partially what I meant when I told the monkey not to reveal me." Itachi didn't look convinced but didn't say any more on the matter. He instead said, "Well, the of our organization has told us to be on the lookout for those well adept in seals, and from what we see you are quite skilled. So we would for you to come with us to our headquarters to speak with him." Naruto acted as if though he were deep in thought over what Itachi had offered, but he knew all too well he didn't have a choice in the matter. So he opted to stall for time instead. "Well, if you don't me asking why you two were here at this particular time." Itachi raised an elegant eyebrow and said, "We heard that third was personally on a mission, and one cannot simply ignore the movements of a Hokage, retired or otherwise. We had also heard tales of one who had dabbled in Orochimaru's depraved jutsu, also we could not ignore. And so it pays off seeing as we have you." Naruto nodded and said, "Well, just thought I'd ask. So shall we be on our way?" Itachi gestured to follow him and Kisame moved to follow behind them both. They all headed off to some unknown location. Village hidden in the leaves. Medical base. Tsunade's office. 1 week later. 6 figures resided in a small heavily lighted room. 2 of which leaned against the wall to one side, trying to stay out of the way of the others, faces set in identical scowls. 2 more rested unconscious on raised platforms, their sea bare. The final 2 were working diligently to save the injured duo. The young woman known as Shizune worked as an assistant to Lady Tsunade as she worked on the 2 before her. Sweat pouring from her brow. Hikaru lay unconscious next to the third. Hikaru had already been patched up and barely a scar remained from his mortal wound. The third was currently being worked upon and showed no sign of any recovery. His body seemed to grow colder by the second, his skin turning a deathly color. A dark circular wound lay bare against his skin and resisted all attempts made to purge it. The 4th Hokage and his sensei Jiraiya spoke silently amongst themselves as each attempt at restoring him to health seemed more hopeless than the last. Tsunade flaked away from the old man, his vitals being stable for the moment. After wiping some sweat from her face, Tsunade said, "I don't know what the kid could have done to him, but nothing I've tried has worked. But I do have a clue. After a while of having no luck finding anything wrong by searching for external signs of damage, I decided to take a look inside. Specifically in the infected area on his sea. At first glance though the old man's internal organs had damaged tissues, but upon closer inspection I discovered a curse seal. The old man's own chakra is destroying him from the inside out." Jiraiya's eyes darkened and he asked, "Is there any way to see the flow of chakra to the seal?" Tsunade bit her lip and shook her head. Normally we could, but placed as it is on the HC off chakra to it would see off chakra to his H as well, he would S anyway. The fourth made to leave the room. As he did so, he looked at the two unconscious figures on the tables and said, "This Naruto will pay for what he has done." And the room was quiet. 10 hours earlier that day. Akatsuki headquarters. Undisclosed location. Naruto stood in a humongous dimly lit room. It reeked of various concoctions. A large statue stood in the center of the room. It had 9 eyes and a gagged mouth. Its mammoth hands rose into the air, and upon each finger stood a being of varying degrees of infamy. All garbed in the same black cloak covered in red clouds. Naruto's attention, however, was focused on the top of the statue's head. For that's where stood what appeared to be a living shadow. Its voice was dark and foreboding, and all that you could see of it besides its dark outline were 2 unwavering eyes. After several minutes of standing in silent observance, the shadow finally spoke to him. "Naruto. We of the Akatsuki organization have been looking for one who has a great mastery in the art of seal making. We have been looking ever since we lost Orochimaru, whose jutsu, as I understand, you have acquired and perfected to a degree." Naruto chuckled a little. The sound echoed all around the large room. He then said, "I can't say I picked up all of his jutsu, nor can I say I perfected them, but I can say that I have mastered what I could, and they have done very well for me. But before I go into too much detail about myself, may I ask why you would need me?" The leader took a few moments before he answered. His voice was level, but it hinted at being impatient. "We need one such as yourself in order to summon forth a being of great power. In order to achieve our ultimate goal, we must have this being. A powerful demon lord." Naruto smirked and said, "Well, if that's your plan," he put his hand to his chin in mock contemplation, "I suppose I could help, but I would need to know the exact nature of your plans. And other things." The shadow flickered out of sight and then appeared before Naruto. It then said, "Before we let you in on our complete plans, you must prove your loyalty and worth. I would also like to know what you mean by other things." Naruto put his hands in their air and said, "Oh, I don't need anything too much. In fact, those others are what I need to summon your friend, but he'll need a few escorts. For I think storming the Leaf Village and stealing its sacred scrolls will be an easy way to prove worth and loyalty. Would it not?" The dark figure nodded and 3 men stepped forward. One of them said, "Storming the Leaf will be dangerous. It is the most defended of all the villages. How will you have us deal with Sanin or the Hokage once we reach there, for we cannot defeat them?" Naruto smiled a viscous smile and said, "You just leave them to me." Present time Leaf Village. Once again in Tsunade's office. The fourth made to leave the room. As he did so, he looked at the 2 unconscious figures on the tables and said, "This Naruto will pay for what he has done." And the room was quiet. Until a huge explosion sounded from outside. All conscious occupants of the room turned to each other and immediately ran outside to discover the source. The group made a mad dash for the center of town as screams followed a particularly loud blast. They ran at break-end speeds in order to stop the next set of explosions and hopefully screams. Upon reaching the center of the commotion, the group found themselves faced with 5 beings. 3 of which were garbed in black cloaks decorated with red clouds. The smallest of which fit the description they had recently come to know. The fourth looked to him and said, "I suppose you're Naruto now, huh? Have you come here to turn yourself into the village that you betrayed?" Naruto laughed and walked around to put his arm over the 5th member of his group. A tall man whose eyes were empty and no emotion or thought splayed across his face, although a dark energy hung about him. Naruto looked to the 4th and said, "Well, since you already know it's me, then we can skip the formalities. My associates and I wish to test the limits of your skills, or we can destroy your village." The Leaf Party drew themselves into attack position. Each one held a fire in their eyes. Naruto, his hands up in mock submission. "Hang on there for a moment. It's not us who we think you should fight, it's them." He pointed to the man, the empty eyes. The empty-eyed man began to build up chakra and dark seals began to flash across his body. Naruto walked around in front of the man and addressed the Leaf group again. "I have 2 other men of similar dispositions implanted deep within the city walls. Almost on Q2, dark chakra signals could be felt gather energy. We know we are no match to ninja of your caliber. Kage and legendary Sanin." But the seals on the man's skin stopped moving and he started performing a long series of complicated hand seals, and when he finished, the ground enveloped him in what appeared to be a coffin with the symbol for one on it. After several seconds of watching attentively, the group were stunned when they saw the coffin door open and who came out. Naruto walked up next to the figure and said, "If you can't defeat them, have them defeat themselves, as I always say. I always wondered what it would be like to watch the cage fight, and now I get to see it." There stood next to Naruto the incarnation of the first Hokage. He stood staring unblinkingly toward the group before him. Naruto laughed at their disgusted faces. "It's you fight him, but just so that you know he can't S. Only you can. You can't K what's already S, isn't that right?" Tsunade walked forward, her rage driving her forward, and she said, "How dare you use my family against their own village? How dare you disgrace my grandfather? You are right though. We can't K him, he is bound to the earth by chakra. So long as we K you, he leave this world. Or did you not know that about the reanimation technique?" She made to attack Naruto, but the first stepped in her way. Naruto merely shook his head and said, "Well, Lady Tsunade, you are correct. These summoned souls are bound to this earth by chakra, and normally K the summoner would be enough to destroy them. But also one needs S for this jutsu as well, don't they?" Tsunade reluctantly nodded her head. "Good girl. So what happens when the summoner S his own body to bring forth the summoned?" Tsunade's eyes widened and shook her head in disbelief. "I implanted 3 vessels with spells in order to control the summoned spirits. Then I used various methods to convince them to S themselves for the greater good." Jiraiya walked forward and pointed an accusing finger at Naruto and said, "You didn't give them a choice, you took control of them just like you did with the puppets before. Hikaru told me all about them." Naruto ignored Jiraiya and continued, "Well, I guess you bunch had better be on your way, seeing as there are 2 more summons on the way. Although you could stick around here and waste time, I'm sure the people of this village would find it a treat that their once great and revered leaders are now turning to destroy them all. How ironic it would to have the Hokages of old who s their very lives in protecting this village be its destroyers. Ah, lovely." 3 ninjas sped off in random directions, only Jiraiya remained behind to face the first. Naruto basked in this moment and smiled in earnest for the time he could remember. How lovely. Deep within the village, hidden in the leaves, beneath the rock faces of the Hokage, stood 5 figures. One of them held the same face as the first face immortalized upon the mountainside. It held all the features of the ancient leader, it held all the same powers, it even held captive the man's soul. The first Hokage had been reborn in the most perverted way possible. Jiraiya stood opposite of the first. His gaze shifted from the first to Akatsuki members to Naruto. Naruto aired an eyebrow at him and said, "Is there something you wish to say, old man, before you s?" Jiraiya continued to glare and said, "What is that you wish to achieve here? Why have you brought forth and disgraced the S? And why have the Akatsuki decided to support you? Are yours and the Akatsuki's goal the same?" Naruto turned toward his companions. "It seems that you little group hasn't been as careful as you thought," one of the cloaked figures said gruffly. "So it seems," the other just grunted. Naruto turned back to Jiraiya. "You have many questions, Lord Jiraiya, but they must wait, for as you can see before you, you have more pressing matters to attend to." The first took on a battle-ready stance. Jiraiya turned to face him. Naruto and his companions turned and headed towards the center of the village. As he walked away, Naruto said over his shoulder, "If you live long enough, you may meet up with an old friend of yours. If you live long enough." Jiraiya acted as if he had not heard and attacked the first. Elsewhere in the village, the 4th and Lady Tsunade ran toward the chakra energies toward the outskirts of the village. The others had already sped off to warn the village, leaving the superior shinobi to handle the situation. They maintained at the same breakneck speed until they could see them. 2 coffins very close to each other and both similar to the first was. The land around the coffins was destroyed. The ground was upturned and buildings were reduced to rubble. The 4th and Lady Tsunade stopped in front of them, waiting for what was inside to come out. One coffin had the kanji for 2 on it and the other was unmarked. The lids fell, revealing the phantoms inside. Out of the coffin on the left stood the 2nd Hokage, and out of the coffin on the right was none other than the 3rd legendary Sannin, Orochimaru. The 4th and Tsunade stood as motionless as the corpses before them, each waiting for the other to make the first move. The 4th turned to Lady Tsunade and said, "He will pay for this," and then he rushed forward, raising and spinning within each palm, hoping to end it all in one move. Tower of the Hokage. Naruto and his entourage walked out the front doors of the tower. BF shinobi and citizens alike are seen scattered about the ground. Underneath Naruto's arm a giant scroll could be seen. They walk not even 10 feet and then a small squadron of Anbu Black Ops land in front of them. The Anbu captain at the front of the group said, "Halt. You will not go any farther. Either surrender or else." The Anbu looked at the scroll underneath Naruto's arm and gasped, "The legendary summoning scroll. So that's what you were after." Naruto turned to the Akatsuki member on his left and said, "Sasori-sama, these insects are in our way, would you mind taking care of them?" Sasori walked before the tense group and said, "Very well." From underneath his cloak out came a puff of smoke, and 6 human puppets came from underneath his cloak, and before the Anbu or Sasori had a chance to attack, the Anbu group were engulfed by a huge explosion. All 8 were K, and all that remained as proof of their existence was a crater. Sasori stood staring at his fellow Akatsuki member. "Deidara, why did you interfere? I had already said I would K them." Deidara smirked and said, "You were taking too long. Besides, I was bored." Sasori moved to get close to Deidara. Naruto walked in between them and said, "No fighting now, boys. You wouldn't want to the show. We have a village to watch crumble. I wonder if the air friends are still fighting our friends." Sasori said, "Like puppets on strings, they will play into our hands." Naruto laughed and said, "Oh, and how I do enjoy a good puppet show." A huge explosion could be seen in the middle of the village. "It looks like this show will be especially entertaining." Naruto moved to go to the smoke until Sasori stopped and said, "Our mission is over, we must return to base. You may stay if you wish, but give us the scroll if you do." Naruto tossed it to them over his shoulder and sped off toward the smoke. Back with Tsunade and the 4th. As the smoke cleared from the 4th's devastating attacks, it revealed the smoking V of the 2's leaves. Limbs were missing from both of the S shinobi and there were scorch marks all over their B. Before their very eyes, the second Hokage's and Orochimaru's wounds healed themselves. The 4th jumped back to rejoin Tsunade. The 2's shinobi mechanically stood up and faced them. Before either group attacked or said anything, a gumbling could be heard. Seconds later, giant tree roots battered through the ground between the 2 groups. The 4th and Tsunade barely jumped out of the way. Once it all settled, the buildings and all the surrounding area were consumed and became a forest-like area. Tsunade and the 4th landed on one of the giant branches of the tree. They began to look around for the enemy, until they saw a figure trapped within the branches of the tree struggling to free itself. Upon closer inspection, it proved to be Jiraiya. Tsunade jumped over to him and punched through the branches, freeing him. Jiraiya fell to his knees and panted, "Thank you, Tsunade. I grew careless and he trapped me. I suppose that was foolish considering who I was fighting." Tsunade sighed and said, "Well, try not to let it happen again because we're going to need you for the fight ahead of us." Jiraiya nodded and said, "Of course." He stood up and then both he and Lady Tsunade were shoved out of the way. A blade skimmed across Jiraiya's left arm. When they looked back, they saw Orochimaru and the 4th crossing blades with each other. The speed and intensity at which they were fighting was incredible. Orochimaru's limbs were stretching beyond all normal proportions. The 4th was moving so quickly that not even the most experienced could follow his movements. As Jiraiya watched the fight, suddenly a fist came flying out of the tree, hitting to the tree opposite him, the first following him all the way. Before Tsunade could run to help either of them, the second Hokage appeared before her, and with just 2 hand seals and no body of water, he sent a huge wave of water towards her, flooding the surrounding area. Not far off from the battle, Naruto stood watching these events with a smile plastered on his face. "I wonder how long they'll last. No matter whoever wins this battle, I will ultimately be the victor. For there is only one way to K them. The jutsu that destroyed me." Naruto's face twisted into the most perverse and twisted smile imaginable. "Only the 4th's own jutsu could stop them. A jutsu that tears the soul from the body at the cost of your own. I couldn't ask for a more fitting end for him. For no one will bring him back this time. He will have no choice but to use that jutsu. Soon enough he will realize the only way to save his village is to once again give up his life. I don't know the full details of his jutsu, but I at least know it seals away the soul. Hopefully it's painful for him." The battle of the superior shinobi became more and more intense as time went on. The 4th, Jiraiya, and Tsunade were all on the verge of collapsing. All 3 were battered and bruised, while their enemies could repair even the most grievous of wounds. They were at the end of their strength. They were slightly disoriented as well. For all the chakra from the 6 of them was spilling out over the area, making it so dense that it made their vision hazy. They barely had the energy to defend themselves. Naruto could be heard from all directions. He eventually showed himself to them. Well, I must commend you for the wonderful show you've given me. But now you've reached the end of the line. This is where it ends. The 3S shinobi came out and rushed the fatigued shinobi. They stiffly stood up and faced their attackers, preparing to fight to the end. Before the attackers reached them, however, 3 more figures flew out of the forest and knocked them off course. Before Naruto could react, a barrier surrounded him from all sides. The 3 figures that now held the shinobi in vice-like grips proved to all 3 be the 3rd Hokage. They looked pale and fatigued, but they held onto the shinobi and didn't let them move an inch. From behind Naruto, the 3rd Hokage's voice came. Naruto turned around to face the 3rd. He smirked as he saw the 3rd's decrepit condition. I see that my jutsu has spread through most of your body. The more you move, old man, the more my poisonous chakra will spread through your body. I suggest you just go and nap, you old fool. For there is nothing you can do here. The 3rd stood straight and looked Naruto in the eye. I will stop you here. I have been given the responsibility of protecting this village, and that responsibility will be mine until I.s. Naruto laughed in his face and mockingly clapped. Wonderful speech, but even if you did stop me, my creations would live on to finish my work and destroy this village. The 3rd started going through hand signs and said, I am the pillar of this village. I hold this law as cage in trust for all those who have come before and all those who will come after. Even if you kill me, there are others stronger than me who will stop you. So long as a single villager lives, the wall of fire will survive and the leaf village will remain. But for now I will stop you with a hero's jutsu. As he finished it, the 4th recognized the pattern and screamed, no, you don't have to, this old man, let me. The 3rd smiled at the 4th and turned to Naruto. As Naruto looked at the 3rd, he wasn't impressed. He said, so that's it, a hero's jutsu. Whatever it doesn't look like you're strong, Ino. Before Naruto's very eyes, a dark and hazy figure appeared above the 3rd. He could not make out any details, but it sent chills up his spine. What in the world is that, old man? The 3rd only grimaced and said, so you can see the Reaper. I guess that's proof that you were him. Suddenly Naruto heard a puff and he looked toward the reanimated corpses and watched as one by one they each turned to dust before his very eyes. Before he could react, the 3rd had a hold of him and he couldn't move his body anymore. What is this, old man? What have you done to me? The 3rd looked at him and smirked. Naruto was about to spit in face before he saw a gigantic demon hovering above the 3rd. What is that? The 3rd smirked. So you can see it all now. It is the Reaper. The very being that ate out the demon fox's soul and sealed it away. It is the jutsu that the 4th Hokage used to become the great hero of our village, and now I will use it to put an end to your evil ways. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.